It's Mark Crowley. I'm back with another How to Draw video. Today we're going to be learning how to draw a dragon's head. Now I've started with a perfect square here. It's about 3.5 inches on all sides. And I'm going to begin by putting down a couple of simple lines in time-lapse to get us started. Alright, so you can see I've put kind of like a sideways letter U here. And then this kind of looks like a letter V that's crossing in front of it and curving around. Now you can kind of see this is going to be the mouth of the dragon. And if you want to follow along, not everybody likes to do these things line by line. I would encourage you to sort of hit the pause button right now and do your very best to replicate these lines exactly where they are. Now I'm going to add a few more, again, in time lapse, but then come back to explain why I made the decisions I did. All right, well, I went through quite a lot of stuff there, but I really think that some of it, in terms of like these extra horns, that's entirely up to you, right? I mean, you can do what you can add no horns there, you can have a whole row of horns, whatever you want to do, basically. But if you want a dragon's head that looks like the one that I'm going to be doing, you will want to pay attention to the shape of the mouth, which I had come across and sort of open up just a little extra. That was one I saw in an illustration that I thought added a cool little element of realism to the mouth. And then also these added lines here are going to be used later on for sort of dividing the surface of the skin into different sections. So let's go ahead now and get into adding a little more detail throughout. I'm going to begin by adding a snout. Is that what that's called? Nostril? Maybe it's just a nostril. A nostril snout, as we in the dragon manufacturing business refer to it. A nostril snout. In fact, why don't I zoom in, actually? I'm going to zoom in bit by bit so that you can see the details of what I'm doing. All right, so I've come into this a snouty area, and I'm adding this nostril here. I saw different artists were coming up with different ways of doing the nostril. Some of them, they don't really protrude from the rest of the snout, but I sort of like the ones that do. And so I'm adding this, and you can see that the nostril itself is quite small. The version that I'm doing kind of narrow and hooking around. It almost looks like an apostrophe, like a reverse apostrophe or something along those lines. Now I found as I was studying dragons' heads that the ones that I liked most made a point of dividing the surface into different sections. And so you can see that across here, this line is not the actual line of the mouth. It's down here. I'll just sort of dash in here real quickly. This is where the teeth are going to be, right? I'll do that, in better detail later on. But there's this whole second section that I've added in here, mainly just for the look of it. And I'm going to also create a secondary ridge here that adds definition to the upper edge of the snout as it comes across. And then here, like I said, I imagine this almost as like a forehead, a brow that's coming down. I always like when a dragon's eye looks a little angry, just to add to that intensity of, giving it some character almost. And so coming across here, I'm going to rope off a whole little section here that's going to be mainly dedicated to wrinkles that surround the eye. It's kind of fun once you decide where the basic idea of where those wrinkles go. You can kind of just start dashing in lots of lines. Although I noticed that the more tightly packed wrinkles seem to occur closest to the eye, and then they sort of widen out a little as they go along. And I'm even going to create a secondary subsection. What's me with all my sections and subsections? And we're going to subdivide this section into another section. This actually, for me, just sort of the whole surface of the dragon's head looks more solid if it's divided into different sections that have different textures. Now, at the end of the video, or more toward the end of the video, I'm going to actually get into the details of adding scales and so forth. But this kind of gives you the basics of that upper area. And I'm going to shift the focus of the camera now so that we can get into drawing the teeth. All right, so we can maybe think of this banded area here as almost like a lizardy lip of some kind. And then below it, I'm going to indicate a very thin, narrow area of what you might call the gum line. and it follows along to this, like I said, this this sort of unusual mouth shape, the way it changes a little in the back. That's just something I saw that I liked. And then I even created, I thought, to add a little bit of webbing almost back here. Somehow adds an element of realism for it, in my eyes anyway. And so what I'm going to do now is start to add the teeth. Now, for reference on the teeth, of course I was looking at illustrations of dragons, but I also found a photo of a sort of like a museum recreation of a T-Rex, the head of a T-Rex. And one of the interesting things that I noticed about that was that the teeth were kind of unevenly spaced, and there wasn't a perfect order to them. In terms of some being larger and some being smaller. It didn't go like large and then smaller and smaller. It wasn't perfect like that. It was sort of irregular in a way that I liked. I thought it looked kind of cool, and I thought, hey, you know, if this is for like a museum, this comes from actual dinosaur teeth that they found, right? So I'm always looking for a feeling of authenticity, and I think when you borrow things from the natural world, your fantasy characters will look more and more real. So notice like this big gap in the gums, and that sort of surprised me because I thought, I don't know if I had ever noticed that about T-Rex teeth, that they can be unevenly spaced like this. And who knows, with my luck, I was looking at a bad museum reproduction, and in the comments section they will be like, Mark, T-Rex's teeth are very evenly spaced, you totally blew it. In any case, that's kind of what I decided to incorporate into that upper area. And down here, I'm going to go ahead and do the lower teeth first here. But you know what, just to save time, I'm going to do this in time-lapse. You've already seen in real time my approach to adding the upper teeth, and the lower teeth are almost the same. All right, so you can see I added the lower teeth here, and just one little note I noticed, again, from the T-Rex, the lower teeth were considerably smaller than the upper teeth. And what I'm going to do is come over here and add the sort of teeth on the other side of the upper jaw. Is that right? The upper jaw. That sounds like a small town in Canada, Upper Jaw. Yes, I was born and raised in Upper Jaw. That is not a Canadian accent. Guys, don't make me do a Canadian accent. I'm going to little by little alienate every viewer I have in every part of the world. In any case, we're kind of wrapping up this part of it, and I will, of course, be doing a lot more shading as we reach the end of this video. But I want to do shift the focus of the camera yet again so that we can pay attention to the horns. All right, well, I'm going to try to move through this pretty quickly. The horn of the dragon can be drawn in a wide variety of ways, and I settled on one that's a little unusual. In fact, if I had to predict there's one thing that some people won't want to emulate, it's the way that I do the horns here, because it's a little unusual, and I only saw it in one or two versions of the dragon illustrations that I looked at, but I thought it was kind of cool, and I thought it would be more interesting to teach this way than to do something that looked kind of like a cow horn, or something like that, which I think, pretty much anybody can learn from studying photographs. This, what I noticed, it sort of had like a triangular aspect to it, and it was broken into these little subdivided parts. And then what I was looking at actually was not even an illustration, it was more like a sculpture of a dragon's head, and it broke into these little bits, that sort of seemed to fit one inside the other, almost. And one of the cooler little detailed aspects of it that I noticed was that some of the, what are these? Vertebrae? I really don't know what the dragon horn vertebrae, had these little indentations. So they didn't just look exactly, the line didn't just go straight across. And I thought that added an interesting little touch to it. And so, rather than go line by line, real time through all the details of all these various horns, I think I'm going to time-lapse a little bit right now so that we can get onto the crucial aspect of adding detail to the surface, like the scales and different stuff like that. So bear with me as I finish this up in time-lapse. All right, well, you can see I added a bunch of these sort of smaller horns. To me, they're almost like decorative horns that just add a cool little look. You can put them along the top near the eyes. You can get them down here by the chin and even down near the throat. It just sort of finishes things off a little. Now, I have what I've done as I've prepared to work on the skin is I have sort of divided the surface of the skin into two different types of surfaces, one of which I refer to in my own strange little mind as snake belly skin. And what I mean by that is there's these lines like this that sort of breaks up into bands. There's this banding quality. I call that snake belly skin. It's copyrighted. Don't you dare use the term without my permission in writing. You are contractually bound. Snake belly skin. And then I'm adding a little more of that snake belly skin up here. And the reason that I came up with that term was to sort of differentiate it from the more common, I guess we'd just call it lizard skin. And by that I mean the stuff that's really divided into these smaller little subsections. I'm going to start doing this right now in real time, but I think I better do some of it in time lapse. In fact, I'm pretty sure I need to zoom in so that you can see the details of it. So you see, I've taken this area and kind of filled it in with little pebbly-looking scales. It's really quite random. There's no system to it the way I do it. Just sort of fit them together, interspersing smaller areas with larger areas. I probably, if I were more serious about this, I probably would devise a system based on actual lizard skin. But there's a limit to how geeked out I'm going to get about drawing this dragon's head. I think, part of the fun is that it's a fantasy character that you can invent and you can make it your own and not get too hung up on, is this officially acceptable to fans of dragons who've studied all this, the lore and so forth. I believe in people doing their own thing. So what I'm going to do now is begin to show you my technique for adding further definition to these scales. And to me, deciding that the light source is here from the upper left, that means that every scale is going to get a little bit more darkness on the lower right. And the more of this you do, the more patient you are about adding this kind of thing, the more three-dimensional, the more solid that surface is going to look. You just need to be consistent all the way across, always adding that darkness on the lower right-hand side. Or, if you decide the light is coming from the other side, it would be the lower left, or even the upper left if the light's coming from below. I think you get the idea. Sometimes I just take these ideas and beat them into the ground. Now, if the light is coming from the upper right, then that means, in any case, I forgot to mention I did a little bit of the sort of snake belly effect here along the nostril. That was just a choice of mine. I'm always trying to define the surfaces, and I find that lines, especially banding lines like this, can help to indicate the actual surface, the direction that skin is sort of being pulled in. And I think before I make this into another incredibly long video, which it already is, I'm going to have to pull back and do my trusty black Prismacolor to do some final lines, and maybe we'll have just one last section on shading. All right, well, I've done the final line work, and what I'm going to do as a sort of a compromise is zoom in on this area of the eye and do some of the shading just in that area in real time, and then we're going to have to finish it up in time-lapse. But at least for part of it, you'll see my techniques for shading. All right, so I'm going to begin by going in a little here and doing the eye. I noticed a lot of people would give the dragon eye, that the typical dragon eye would have this very narrow, vertical, crocodile-like stripe in the middle of it, and that was the sort of basic approach to drawing the dragon eye. Now, a lot of people would almost have like the whites of the eyes, or the yellow section where the whites of the eyes would be, and for some reason I'm not crazy about being able to see the interior of the eye really clearly. And so you can see what I'm doing here is I'm using the black Prismacolor to sort of darken up that little pupil, I guess it is, that sort of vertical area. But then I'm also shading in quite a lot with my Dixon Ticonderoga, just a standard number 2 pencil, to kind of obscure it a little bit. I just don't, for some reason, I don't like it when you can see too much of the interior of a dragon's eye, because it just looks, it looks too human to me almost. I almost want to give it a completely blacked out eye that has no detail at all. But anyway, I want to show you how I keep with that idea of the light coming from the upper left, and so all the shadows are going to come here on the lower right, and this whole area in here around the eye is going to get shaded in quite a bit, because the brow is sort of casting a shadow, right, over that immediate area. And then so basically I'm kind of going across this whole, any sort of subsection, like I said at the beginning, I sort of divide into subsections. I'm adding shading just along the lower right-hand edge of each one of those areas, and you could also, if you want to really go for it, do these subdivided sections, give them shadows all their own. This area that I called the lizard skin, I'm just going to shade, in general, the entire surface of it, just to give it a little bit of tone. And then that separates it again from what I called the snake belly. Why do every time I change my voice and say snake belly? Sounds like a rock and roll band. Ladies and gentlemen, snake belly. But you can see that by giving different sections different colors, that's another way of just making the drawing a little more interesting, a little more 3D. So my apologies, I think I really am going to have to wrap this one up all in time-lapse. You're going to see me adding shading. This area inside the mouth is going to go really jet black, so pay special attention to how I do that. But otherwise, we'll just wrap this up in time-lapse and then come back with a few final words. Alright, well, we're pretty much done with this one. I want to show you one last little trick for finishing off your illustration. If you take your eraser and run it along some of these sections and erase away, you can create a sort of three-dimensional quality. It sort of adds a shimmer to it. See how that happens? And little touches like that can really go a long way towards making your illustration look a little more three-dimensional. But I do want to wind this video down, as I usually do, by thanking anyone who has supported me by getting my instructional How to Draw Manga book, Mastering Manga, either that or Miki Falls, the 4 books in that graphic novel series, as well as Brody's Ghost. We got 3 books out of a total of 6 in that series that are already in the stores. But let's go ahead and wind this one down. I want to thank you all for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back with another one real soon.